Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hope you all are having a great summer. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Let's Read Together, Tips to Make Storytime Fun and Frequent. My name is Michelle Tyler, and I am the Parent Group Specialist for the START Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities project with the SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. Today's webinar will provide useful tips so you and the child you're reading to can really enjoy the storytime experience. Tatiana?
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone, and I would like to begin by telling you a little bit more about SPAN. SPAN Parent Advocacy Network is a statewide organization that is federally funded by the United States Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, United States Department of Health and Human Services, and multiple other state agencies and foundations. We'd like to think of SPAN as an umbrella organization that focuses on education, health, parent leadership, and human services. Some of our programs are Parent Training and Information Center, Special Education Volunteer Advocates, New Jersey Statewide Parent to Parent, New Jersey Inclusive Child Care Project, and our very own START Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities in Schools. Please visit our website for additional information about these and other programs. And START Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities is a partnership between the New Jersey Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs, and SPAN. We offer programs and services that support the engagement of families to improve outcomes for students, including developing and sustaining special education parent advisory and support groups in communities and school districts. Through workshops, regional meetings, webinars, and parent leadership development activities, we help parents to become informed and active participants in their child's education, partner with educators in improving educational programs for students with disabilities, particularly in the area of inclusion, start and strengthen special education parent advisory groups or parent support groups, and finally, increase effective family engagement to improve special education programs, policy, and practices in school districts and communities. Please meet our team. All 7 of us serve as parent group specialists. In addition, Debbie Esposito and I, Tatiana DeGrossa, are co-directing the project. And Debbie is also our literacy project coordinator. Monique DeJay Wilson is the New Jersey Tiered System of Supports coordinator. And Brenda Figueroa is the Inclusion Project Coordinator. To connect with our team, please visit our webpage. And I just wanted to add real quick that all of us on the team are avid readers themselves who found love of reading in early childhood and helped cultivate the same passion for reading in our children. It's not to say that it's always been easy or even fun. In preparation for this webinar, we bonded over shared experiences and funny stories about trying to read with our children, some of whom fidgeted and others openly resisted reading a book together. And we all agreed that we would have greatly benefited from the information that we're about to share with you today on this webinar. So stay tuned and let's begin with a quick poll from Fani.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And now that you have met us, and before we begin, we would like to see who's here with us in the room. So we have 2 questions that we would like to ask. The first question is, and click all that apply, that my child is or the children that I work with are in preschool, early elementary K to 2, upper elementary 3 to 5, middle school, high school, or beyond. And I'll give you a few moments for you to answer. I see that about 62% of you have answered. I will be closing the poll right now. And let's share your answers. So 67% of you said that your child or the children that you work with are in preschool. 47% said early elementary K to 2, 40% upper elementary 3 to 5, 20% middle school, and 13% high school or beyond. Thank you for answering. And we have one more question. I am looking for strategies for reading with, and select one, my own child or children, or a classroom of children. Take a few moments. I see about 70% of you have answered. I'll give you one more moment and let's close the poll. So let's share your answers now. So I see that 71% of you are looking for strategies for your own child or children, and 29% of you are looking for strategies to work with the children in your classrooms. Thank you so much for answering the poll.
So welcome everyone. Most of us know about the benefits that come from reading with our children. So many of us try to make sure that we read with our children every night, no matter what. Even when we're tired, even when our children are tired and cranky, or even when we're trying to remember what we're supposed to add to the grocery list. We know that this is what we're supposed to do, so like many of the other tasks that we perform every day, reading to our children becomes just one more chore. I remember reading to my very own active son when he was younger and constantly trying to redirect him and get him to focus. So my son is a teenager now, and in preparing for this webinar, I've constantly thought, if only I'd had the benefit of these tips when my son was younger, our time together would have been more enjoyable for both of us. So at the end of this webinar, we really want you to be able to talk with your reader in a way that lets them play an active role in story time. We want you to identify the skills that build good readers, and we want you to calmly be able to address challenging storytime behaviors. And finally, we want you to create an environment that makes reading together fun and engaging. Our goal on the START-EPSD project is always to provide you with the best practices based on information that is both current and evidence-based. In order to do that, on this webinar, we've invited a guest speaker. Dr. Jamie Zabolski is the co-author of Booksmart, How to Develop and Support Motivated Readers. Jamie's work with families is evidence of her belief that, quote, teaching parents to serve as their children's teachers and therapists is tremendously powerful, end quote. We're happy to be able to work with Dr. Zabolski as a literacy consultant on the START-EPSD team. She embodies the SPAN motto, empowered parents, educated, engaged, and effective. With that, allow me to introduce Dr. Jamie Zabolski.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I'm really excited to be joining you all today, and I've loved preparing for this webinar, which is led by incredible moms and committed readers. Our conversation today is going to be focused on the behaviors and actions that you can engage in as a parent to support your child in becoming a successful and motivated reader. I'm emphasizing that we're talking about your behaviors and actions and not your child's skills or abilities, because you have so much more control over the former, and because we know that reading together benefits kiddos of all skill levels and with all types of needs, as long as we can be flexible about the way we read with them and the expectations we have of them. The picture on this slide is actually a picture of my father and I reading side by side when I was about 18 months old. And from the time that I was very young, my parents demonstrated to me that reading was fun, cool, exciting, just as neat a thing to do at the beach as build a sandcastle or jump in the waves. And so I first wanted to read, not because I thought the stories were so interesting or that reading would help me do well in school, but because I really wanted to look just like my dad. I wanted to copy what he did, and I wanted him to think that I was doing a good job of grown-up stuff. And so we're starting off by talking about this idea that reading can be this source of pride and connection, and that it can be passed down in homes and communities, because as we go through our talk today and we talk more explicitly about strategies that you can use to help your children recognize letters or understand stories, we really want you to know that the road to becoming a reader should be first and foremost fun. And we want kids to see reading as a social activity they can do with you, not a chore. We don't want kids to focus on learning to read just because of what it's going to do for their grades in school. We want them to be passionate readers because they see it as an activity that helps them connect to other people themselves, and the broader world around them. And so that really means we need to set our expectations based on their needs. When young children see that adults that they care about want to read, it makes them want to read too. And so reading together in that way is going to let your child build an identity as a reader and the motivation that they need to get through the challenges that come up during the really long road to reading success. We know that there are plenty of challenges that will come up for all learners and for all families. And so I want to take a minute to talk a little bit more now about the big and important reading skills that children develop throughout the preschool years and the elementary school years, which it sounds like where a lot of you are right now with your kiddos. So you can see that in this slide, the reading comprehension circle here is our big circle. This is our end goal of reading development, and it's the ability to make sense of what you read. This is a skill that we as grown-ups use all of the time when we read a newspaper article, a book chapter, or an instruction manual, and we need to figure out what's going on in a story. We need to keep track of details, understand the big picture, and look up words or ask questions about things that are confusing to us. In order to reach that place, though, there are many other skills that children need to build. We're going to talk about just two of the big buckets today, and we're going to spend more time focusing on listening comprehension, or being able to understand what's being said out loud, than decoding, or being able to sound out the words on the page. And this is because we know that this first area of listening comprehension is where the support of families and parents is so crucial for all students as they proceed to being reading comprehenders. And the reason for that really is that if your child doesn't understand something when somebody's talking about it out loud, if they can't define a word or make a prediction about how a character is feeling through conversation, then they won't be able to do those same things when reading independently, even if they can decode. The knowledge that comes from these conversations is really important for long-term reading comprehension, and that's where you and shared reading time come in. I also want to note here that we don't mean to imply that decoding will come more easily to your child. The majority of elementary school students require direct, explicit, and multisensory instruction in order to learn to read the words on the page, and this process can be even more challenging for children who have learning difficulties. Even so, we're going to focus on listening comprehension today because it's actually a way to boost the reading skills and reading motivation of students with decoding challenges and to compensate for some of the difficulties they might have. Shared reading has benefits for all families, and it is a flexible enough activity that you can focus on the skills that your particular child needs to build in the way they need to build them. So you might be wondering, what is shared reading the way that we're talking about it, since we're using that term over and over again today? What we really picture shared reading to be is an interactive activity that involves the active participation of both you and your child. On the top left here in picture 1, you can see an adult and child engaging in what looks like parent-directed reading, where the grown-up is doing the reading and asking some questions, and the child is hopefully paying attention, but maybe spacing out a little bit because the adult is doing so much of the heavy lifting. This is the most common type of shared reading that families engage in before participating in webinars like these, and it works well some of the time, with some kids, some books, some times of day. But it can also lead to some of the challenges that you guys might be facing at home right now. And so we're going to encourage you to also make more room in your home for child-directed shared reading, in which your child tells the story either from memory, by narrating the illustrations, or sounding out words, which might be what's happening in pictures 2 and 4, or joint book reading, in which you mix these two approaches, which might be happening now in picture 3. And so we really want to highlight for you that children can build so many skills from being exposed to each of these approaches, rather than just from hearing books from start to finish. And you can pick the right approach for your child and the story that you're reading and everybody's mood. Doing that lets you really focus on the skills that are important to you and your child and make reading together more fun and playful. Picking the right approach can be really tough sometimes though, so we want to hear a little bit more from you now. what brought you here to join us today, and what strategies do you want to know a little bit more about? Fani will give you some time now to respond to this poll so we can hear a little bit more.
You can either type your answers in the chat box or privately on the questions pane. And we already have a question from one of our participants, and it is, how do I develop a love of reading in a child who was diagnosed with a learning disability in the area of reading and who also proclaims that she hates it?
And so while we're waiting for other questions to come in, I just want to note that I think that your question is so common for many families who really do feel like their child has been turned off to reading because they haven't had a positive experience. It's hard for them to sound out words. It's hard for them to give the right answer. In a little while, Monique is going to talk about setting the stage for reading development and making reading fun. And I think as we go through our talk today and talk about giving your child more choice, picking high interest books for them, asking questions that feel relevant to them, we're really talking about resetting the reading experience so that your child feels more active in the process and feels more competent in the process. And I want to say again, I think it's so common for kids who do have learning challenges to turn off from reading because that protects their ego and it protects their self-esteem, but we can really reset the stage for them.
Okay, and I have one more question. I work with early Head Start children. I would like to understand how to capture their attention.
Wonderful. I think that I'll let us keep talking through the slides because that is really our hope from the webinar today. We'll have time for more questions at the end of the presentation. And if we haven't answered that question thoroughly, or if there's other questions that come up, please chime in again so we're really able to answer the questions that will help you work with your children or students better.
Yes. Send us your questions at any point during the webinar, either by writing it on the chat box or putting it on the questions pane.
Thank you. Thank you, Fani. So as we start to tell you more about the specific challenges or strategies that you can use to enhance shared reading time, we want to begin by telling you about the few general guidelines that are always helpful when reading together. So first, be conscious of your child's ability level. How long are they usually able to stay focused? How long can they sit still, pay attention? What words or letters does your child already know? What skills are they currently developing? These are all good things to know and keep in mind when picking books that will keep them motivated and when choosing times to read together. Being mindful of these things will let you support your child's interest and skill development by focusing reading time in a way that will work for them. And you also will want to praise your child for staying focused, for trying hard, and for coming up with great ideas. These are things that you can constantly reinforce in your child. The specific strategies that we'll teach you today are associated with a type of shared reading called dialogic reading, which is an interactive way to read together that helps strengthen listening comprehension. It's dialogic because it's a dialogue between two people, not a monologue where the parent just talks at the child. You're speaking with the child, not at the child. To do that, we're now going to give you a lot of specific tips about how to ask those questions and what to say when you comment. We'll take you through peer and crowd, 2 words that you can use to remember these tips. Monique, let's set the stage.
Thank you, Debbie, and good afternoon, everyone. Next, we're going to focus on very specific questions and strategies that you can use to enrich reading time with your child. However, we also want to be sure that you don't get so focused on these details and forget to simply set the stage for having fun together. Remember what we said when this webinar started? We want you to know that the road to becoming a reader should be about seeing reading as a fun and social activity, not a chore. For that reason, and to help children identify as readers, we would rather see you read with your child in a joyful way for 6 minutes than to cram in 25 minutes of stressful and scolding reading time. Always quit while you're ahead and give you and your child a break, especially when you're having a tough day. Even if 6 minutes does not work, try a couple of minutes to even have a conversation about the book. Even a few minutes may capture their attention and can be constructive and engaging. So let's set the stage. The best way to set the stage are to pick a quiet time and a space where you can read with your child free of distractions. And that often means turning off your cell phone and any other electronic devices and theirs. Despite our highly technological society, it is still true that picking up a good book as a paperback or an ebook can hook your child on reading for pleasure. Put away any exciting or distracting toys that may catch the interest of your child, but be able to tolerate your child wiggling, eating a snack, or doing some quiet coloring or fiddling while you read. You need to remember that some children may find comfort in a favorite blanket, a toy, or other things, so we need to be sure to distinguish the difference between distraction and comfort. It's best to allow children to attend in the ways that are most comfortable for them. Consider going to the library or a coffee shop, Barnes and Nobles, if time and finances permit, because a special reading place can also build reading identity and motivation. Be sure to make this time together something to look forward to rather than a chore. Let your child choose the book. Find out what your child is most interested in, the reading space, and the time to foster excitement. All of these small choices, but very important choices, increase motivation. Prior to starting the book, do a picture walkthrough. Walk through the book and build background knowledge about this topic. So the stage is set to create an environment that makes reading together fun and engaging. Next slide. So if you have any questions about setting the stage or anything we've discussed so far, please put your questions into the chat box, and Tatiana and Fani will field these questions for us.
We have one question coming from a parent. So she's saying, I'm not able to get my son to sit down and listen to my reading. He's just everywhere. While his siblings are sitting and listening, he's not able to sit and listen. He runs away most of the time. So she's looking for suggestions how to read with him. Thank you.
So I actually think this is a great question to ask now as we go on to talk about the peer strategy in a moment, which is one of the 2 specific strategies that we use during dialogic reading time. And one of the first things that we always say about peer is that you can do it even when you don't have a book right in front of you. And so if you have a child who really struggles to sit still or finds looking at the print in a book aversive for some reason and isn't hooked into story time, one strategy that you can start to use is having conversations about stories even when you're not in the midst of reading together. So you might have watched a television show that he was really excited about, or a movie that he was really excited about, and you can start to solicit his opinions about the characters in that story, or even teach him some new vocabulary about that story while there's no book in front of you. Over time, you might figure out that shows like that or movies like that are interesting to him because there's some theme in them that you also know come up in some children's books. And so it might be that the vehicle for getting him engaged in reading is buying a book then, or taking out a book from the library that is different than the ones that you might like yourself. I personally have a son who loves every 5-minute Disney Christmas book or Pixar story that comes about. And I hate spending the money on all of these commercial cartoon books. And I do it because it's really exciting to him. It's one of his preferred reading activities. So I think part of the answer to your question is to really start small, use peer, which I'll talk about in a moment, even without a book in front of you, and to also read the things that are engaging to him, whether it's Sports Illustrated for kids or a pamphlet about going to an amusement park. It might be finding the right hook for him. We'll go back to this a little bit more later. To make sure that we have time to get through the main content, I want to talk through this next slide and this idea of peer, which really is this idea of starting a conversation by first asking a question and then making comments based on your child's response. And so again, you can do this during story time or other times of the day and pick topics that you think will be interesting to your kiddo and that will help build their skills in a specific area by explaining new vocabulary words or new ideas. We also want to encourage you to do this in the way that's going to work best for your child. This might be a 2-minute exchange for the parent who just wrote in, or it might be a 20-minute exchange for someone who has a child who's really curious and engaged in a story. Do what works for you. No matter what, you'll start off with our P, prompting your child with a question about the story. Prompting your child is going to focus their attention, even if they are running around the room, running off somewhere else, and engage them for a short while in that story and help them understand the story a little bit better. So you might do something as simple as pointing to a picture in the story, maybe a balloon, and saying, "What is that?" Then you're going to E, evaluate your child's response. And for my example now, I'll assume the child gave a correct response. I'll talk in a minute about what we would do if the response was incorrect. But if a child says, "That's a balloon," you'll say, "That's right, that's a balloon." And then you'll expand on what your child said to give them some more descriptive language or give them some more information. You might say, "It's a really big red balloon. We saw a huge balloon like that in the grocery store yesterday," so that you've introduced them to big, red, huge. And then you're going to R, you're going to repeat or revisit the prompt that you started with, encouraging your child to use some of that new information or new language. So can you tell me a little bit more about what the balloon looks like? And your child might say, "Oh, it is really huge." It's giving them this opportunity to use the new word. So remember, you might end up spending 20 minutes on this topic. If your child is really excited about balloons, you might end up looking up information about balloons together, drawing a picture of a balloon flying away or deflating. And if your child is confused about some of the language there, you might slow down to help build that new idea and put the book away until another day. And that's totally okay. We really want you to use this strategy to hear more from your child, to demonstrate that you're curious about what they're noticing and thinking, and to build their knowledge. So that's one reason that it's really important not to rush through the book, but instead to give them time to make sense of the story with you. I want to also talk a little bit about what you would do if you had to expand on your child's response and it wasn't entirely accurate. We've talked a little bit already today about this idea of helping children feel like an active learner in the process and building self-esteem, keeping them motivated. So when we're reading with a child, we don't want to say a lot of no's. We don't want to correct them and tell them they did something inaccurate. We want to build on what they've noticed already. So for example, in the story that I was just sharing with you about a balloon, your child might call that a ball rather than a balloon. And rather than saying, "No, that's actually a balloon," you might want to say, "Oh, you're noticing that that's like the blow up ball that we got a few weeks ago. You're right, you do blow air into that also, and then it gets bigger. This one is actually called a balloon." That might be your expansion. If your child is really curious about science and balloons, you might add more information. You might say, "A balloon is made of even thinner plastic than most balls, and it's going to keep getting bigger and bigger and thinner until it could pop." Or going back to the question that we just had, maybe your child would already be out the door, down the stairs if you talked for such a long time, and your expansion would be much shorter than that. But in any case, what you're trying to do is gently give more details and a deeper understanding of what's going on to your child in a way that what works for them. And so you can see that this is really a process of building knowledge. And it might take thinking outside the box to make sure that the child understands what they're reading or talking about. So you might pause for quite a while to look up a word, watch a video, even blow up a balloon together. Or if you were talking about someone who was really surprised when a balloon popped, you might both jump up and imitate somebody feeling surprised together as a way to get out some of a child's wiggles and let them know that moving during story time is okay. The end goal here is not necessarily finishing the whole book, but understanding this new idea together. So we want to really give you some ideas of what this looks like in action, beginning with just the simplest type of dialogic interaction. We're about to show you a really cute video where you can see a very young child who doesn't yet have very strong expressive language skills, but is still able to mimic his dad's conversational style and still knows that he's an important part of a dialogic conversation. So let's watch the video and then we'll talk about it a little bit more.
They need to work on that, right? Yes, okay. Did you understand it though? No. Okay. All right. Oh, not this one. This is the grand finale of this. Yeah, that's the last one. That's what I was wondering. I don't know what they're gonna do next season because they did some stuff this time. Exactly.
You can see their eye contact, the back and forth dialogue here, little kiddo pointing and engaging.
Right, don't bring that again. You know what I'm saying? Don't do the same stuff. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I was thinking that. Yeah. Yeah. Like go somewhere else with that, but don't bring it here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's what I said. He was like, you know what I'm saying? And I was like, what in the world? Don't do that here. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Really? I thought the same thing. We think a lot alike, huh? Oh, that's crazy. Right.
And so you can see here that, yes, this is cute and funny, but more than that, this is this really powerful exchange where a dad and a son are communicating together, and the father is conveying that his son has important information to share. We think a lot alike. Oh, we're thinking about this the same way. This is really a dialogic exchange with two active participants. And when we talk about these early stages of dialogue, we often talk about this idea of serve and return. Because like basketball or, sorry, not basketball, like volleyball or tennis really require keeping a ball up over the net, these conversations really require keeping words and gestures moving back and forth. That's why, even though you can use peer at other times during the day, we often say book reading is such a powerful opportunity for peer because the story in front of you gives you this initial way to get the ball over the net, to start off by prompting and asking your child a question. Stephanie is now going to give us some really specific ways that you can start your serve and return process with your children and ask some of those specific questions.
Thanks, Jamie. There are 5 different types of prompts or questions that you can use to get the dialogue started, and we'll give specific examples of each in just a moment. These prompts include completion questions, when you ask your child to finish a sentence by filling in the blanks. Recall questions, when you ask your child to share details from the book that will demonstrate she understood the plot and kept track of the sequence of events. Open-ended questions, when you ask questions that your child can't answer with a single word because it will lead to deeper conversations. WH questions, when you use the words who, what, when, where, and why to teach your child new vocabulary words and focus on details of the story. And distancing questions, when you ask questions to help your child make connections between the story that you read and their own life. You do not need to feel pressured to ask all of these questions during each reading session. Different questions work for different kids at different times and with different books. But here are some general guidelines. Completion, WH and recall. So, which is the C, the R, and the WH from the previous slide. Those are questions that are particularly important to use with younger children or with children who have challenges with comprehension and can help them define new words and remember key ideas. Open-ended and distancing questions, so the O and the D from the last slide, become more important as children develop larger vocabularies and stronger critical thinking skills. When you ask your child open-ended questions based on the story overall, you build vocabulary and comprehension. When you ask your child distancing questions that link his or her own experience to the story, you build background knowledge and perspective taking. Regardless of what type of question you ask, remember to always use peer to follow up on your child's response. The purpose of the question is really to get you to peer and make reading time together into a dialogue. So don't get too focused on asking the perfect question. Simple questions like, what's this? And pointing, or what do you think will happen next? Work well to get a dialogue going. So let's review. The road to becoming a reader should be about seeing reading as a fun and social activity rather than a chore. The end goal of reading development is reading comprehension, or the ability to make sense of what you read. Dialogic reading is a type of shared reading that is interactive. That is, you read with the child and not at the child. To enrich the conversation, use peer. Prompt, evaluate, expand, repeat. Crowd helps us remember the 5 types of questions or prompts: completion, recall, open-ended, WH, and distancing. Now Michelle is going to give you an example using a story that I think we're all familiar with. Michelle?
Thanks, Stephanie. And I would like to add that you can use peer and crowd without a book in front of you. So talking about a familiar story that you both remember can be a good way to start using this technique with your child. I've used it with my son in the car, and so I can work on his deficits in communication and in comprehension. And we were also able to transfer those skills to story time. So after I read a snippet of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, we'll talk about some examples of crowd questions that you can ask as they relate to the story. As we read through each sentence, take a second to think about a simple question that you could ask. So let's try it out. Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Goldilocks. She went for a walk in the forest. Pretty soon, she came to a house. She knocked, and when no one answered, she went right in. At the table, there were 3 bowls of porridge. Goldilocks was hungry. She tasted the porridge from the first bowl. "This porridge is hot," she exclaimed. So she tasted the porridge from the second bowl. "This porridge is cold," she said. So she tasted the last bowl of porridge. "This porridge is just right," she said happily, and she ate it all up. Now you could probably picture as I read this aloud what it would feel like to pause after each sentence and ask, what's the main character's name? Or where does she go? Or what happened next? And then to expand on your child's observation with a point of view of your own. There are countless questions we can ask, even about a story this simple. So for example, if we wanted to begin by asking completion questions, which is the C in crowd, those questions will help build vocabulary. So we could say, once upon a, and the child could say the answer. And you would congratulate the child for being right, repeat the answer, and then expand on the child's answer. So you would say time, that's right. A lot of fairy tales begin with the words once upon a time. Another completion question could be, when she tasted the second bowl of porridge, she said, "This porridge is too," and the child could say cold. And again, you would acknowledge that the child had the right answer, repeat the answer, and then expand. So you would say cold, you're right. The first was too hot, and now this is the opposite. It's too cold. Another example is, finally, she said, "This blank is just right." Now it's okay to give your child a few seconds to process your question in order to get an answer. If your child can't fill in the blank, you can say the P sound for porridge to prompt your child. And if the child says porridge, you can add, yes, porridge is right. That's an old-fashioned word for oatmeal. So these are examples of how peer can help to enrich the conversation. The parent expanded on the child's answer. And that's an example of the second E in peer. So now let's move on to recall questions. That's the R in crowd. If you have read the whole story, you might evaluate your child's memory of the story structure with questions like, what happened first? Oh, and then what happened next? Or you can ask, what did Goldilocks do when she got to the first house? Yes, she knocked. Did she wait for someone to answer? Or another example could be, how many bowls of porridge did she taste? What happened when she tasted them? You're right. She was disappointed when she tasted the one that was too hot and the one that was too cold. Then she was happy when she found the one that was just right. So now, even though open-ended questions comes next in the acronym CROWD, we're going to give you some examples of WH questions because they're really simple to do. And in part, the WH questions can often be asked by pointing to a picture on the page so that the child can use the picture clues as an answer. So these questions include, what is the story about? I'm sorry, who is the story about? Or what is on the table? Or where is Goldilocks going? You can always ask simple, you can always simply ask the name of an object or person in any book that you read. And if you're not sure that the child is understanding or paying attention, this is a good place to pause and say, can you point to the porridge? So we just talked about WH questions. Now let's look at some examples of open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are my favorite because they really provide a great way to spark dialogue, as there's no right or wrong answer, and you can always find ways to expand your child's reply by building background, knowledge, and vocabulary. So some examples of open-ended questions are, what do you think Goldilocks saw on her walk through the forest? Or how do you think Goldilocks felt when she first opened the door? Which porridge that was the wrong temperature do you think made Goldilocks unhappier, and why? So after asking any of these questions, you would also use peer to share your own thoughts. So for the second example, how do you think Goldilocks felt when when she first opened the door? My child might say, Goldilocks felt hungry. But then you could say, oh, I think she might be hungry. Her belly could be rumbling after that long walk through the woods. That response would signal to the child that they made a good prediction, and you're also introducing a new word, rumbling, and the child will also relate and tie that into being hungry. When responding to your child's answer, you should affirm what the child has already said and then build upon their idea. Similarly, when asking a distance question, which is the D in crowd, there are no right or wrong answers here either. These questions allow the child to make connections between text and life. It allows them to develop and exercise perspective-taking skills and think critically about what they've read. These type of questions gives you an opportunity to share your own life experience as well. So some example could be, have you ever gone anywhere without permission? Or how would you feel if someone used the things in our house without asking? Now, if your child said that would make me angry, then you could say, I understand being angry. I remember when your uncle broke my Barbie sports car, and I was angry for weeks. Another example is, have you ever eaten something that was the wrong temperature? And after they answer, you can say, remember that time that your nuggets were still cold in the middle after you microwaved them? Just like Goldilocks, you didn't like that either. Again, there are no right or wrong answers here. These questions allow the child to make connections between text and their life, and it helps them to develop and exercise perspective-taking skills and to think critically about what they've read. These examples and others are in the handout section on the control panel. So like I said, feel free to download them at any time. Jamie's going to now talk about modifying prompts. Jamie?
Yep. And the reason we want to talk about modifying prompts is we know that this information might feel overwhelming for you. And these types of questions, and a lot of these questions all at once, might seem really complicated for your child, especially if your child is young or has some language or learning challenges, or if you're reading a new book with sophisticated language for the first time. So we want to remind you that prompts can be nonverbal. You can simply point to the picture you want them to name or the word you want them to read. They can include lots of visual cues with attention to the illustrations and less attention to the text itself. They can be short in duration, so just a short phrase, and limiting your expansions so that you're not talking and adding too much information in at one time. And you can repeat the same question many times throughout the book, focusing just on what happens next, or let's find a letter B together on this page to get into a routine together. The reason that you're engaging in shared reading time is because you want to get at that listening comprehension or decoding piece that will lead to eventual reading comprehension. And so you can make your prompts as simple as you need to build that one skill that you want to focus on with your child during this reading session in a really small and supported way. Using the strategies this way can allow you to adapt the prompts to your child's age, stage, and needs. I want to give you a few more examples of how you can make these prompts really simple and fun for your child. So if you're using a completion or WH prompt, which is already fairly simple, you can give your child different response options to make it even simpler. So if you were reading a book about Clifford, the big red dog, you might say, Clifford was a big, friendly, and take a pause there and give your child a chance to process on their own, to look at the picture, to retrieve the word dog from memory. If that is difficult for your child, you might give response options. So you'd say a big friendly dog, a big friendly cat. You could even make one of your hands a dog hand and your other hand a cat hand, and let your child high five you on the correct hand without having to verbalize themselves, but to demonstrate that they knew that picture was of a dog. If you're using recall prompts to help your child build memory skills, you can use visual aids or text aids to help your child jog their memory and to let them build their own comprehension skills over time. So if you said, okay, whose bed did Goldilocks try out first? And your child couldn't recall that immediately, you'd say, let's go back to that page and check it out together. And then you would go back through, you could read the sentence again and look at the picture again to really make sure that you are supporting your child in building their comprehension skills at a rate and in a way that worked for them. So I'm going to let Monique talk a little bit more now about ways to engage readers who might have more struggles or challenges, and so that we can remind you all to do these strategies in a flexible way that works best for you and your family.
Thanks, Jamie. So as we come to the end of our webinar, even though we've covered many strategies today and we've shared so many questions that you can ask during reading time, we want you to remember that we are not encouraging you to do all this at once. You need to think about your child's skills and mood, your own mood, when you start reading together, and do what works best for you both to make that reading session fun and meaningful. Turning book time into an interactive dialogue is the key, more than any particular question or definition. So we want to encourage you to be present with your child. Allow reading time to be an opportunity for you to relax and to bond with your child by using peer, prompt, evaluate, expand, repeat, and really listening to what your child has to say. Increase the number of questions you ask of your child and give your child more opportunities to take the lead. Be patient when it comes to minor misbehaviors or inattentiveness, and try to redirect your child's attention toward the book. It's very important to remember that it's okay if you don't finish the whole story, or if you read the same book over and over and over, or read a book while your child fidgets. If your child continues to act up, simply end the reading time, but do so calmly. You've had enough for today, and you'll get a chance to read together again very soon. We know that many of you have questions about how to get and keep your child engaged, and you want to be sure to say, we want to be sure to say, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer to this question. There can be several reasons a child doesn't stay focused, including that they simply don't like the book they are being read to. You might want to ask yourself, does the child have interest in the topic or the theme of the book? Is the length of the book appropriate for their age? Did you do the picture walk through the book or build the background knowledge about the topic that we discussed during setting the stage? Matching books to readers is so important that we have resources at the end of the webinar and online that can help with this. We might also wonder, how old is your child? Very young children are always on the move, and this is all young children, and may sometimes constantly be on the move during story time, and that's okay. Or your child may have a sensory need. Have they been diagnosed with ADHD, a sensory processing disorder, or autism spectrum disorder? Their sensory needs must be recognized and accommodated, which is why we've said that fidgeting or cuddling or including a toy that's comforting during the reading time is okay. We want to acknowledge that reading time can be very stressful for many families, at least some of the time, and let you know that it's normal to get into a reading rut or to have to figure out other creative ways to engage your child while reading together. We hope that the information that we discussed today helps make reading time feel more engaging, especially when you've had a tough day. And we want to make some suggestions to you. Have fun and give praise. Try not to sweat the small stuff. And end reading time while everyone is still happy, or recognize when to stop for the day when having a difficult time. You can always go back and try again later on or even another day. So if you have any questions about anything we've discussed at this point, please put your questions into the chat box. And again, Tatiana and Fani will field these questions for us and provide an opportunity for your questions to be answered.
Monique, there are no further questions at this time.
Okay.
Okay, great. Debbie?
Thank you, Monique. So I just wanted to, as we wind up, and we are nearing the end, but I wanted to remind everyone, there are a few reminders that I wanted to mention. First of all, you can access our literacy resource collection on the SPAN website. And our literacy resource collection is divided into three parts. The first section is supporting literacy in your child's classroom and includes sections on how to understand what your child is learning in class, as well as how to communicate with your child's teacher or how to work with your child's teacher. The second section provides activities to promote literacy at home, including some of the things we mentioned earlier. And the third section is for promoting literacy achievement in your school and advocating for literacy programs. The second reminder is that during the weekend of November 7th, 8th, and 9th, we will be having a Storytime boot camp. So if you enjoyed what you heard today, but maybe some of your questions weren't explored as much as you would like to, you'll have a chance to do more of a deep dive during our Storytime boot camp. You can attend in Central New Jersey on November 7th, or you can choose to attend on the 8th in the Northern region or in the South on November 9th. More information will be coming about these events, including how you can register. And finally, Jamie, would you like to talk a little bit more about Booksmart?
Absolutely. So we have the booksmartfamily.com website, which includes more information about Booksmart itself, but more importantly, some activities and strategies that you can use at home to build specific early literacy skills. And I know Debbie will be emailing out a list of recommended books that we include in here to really engage your child in story time. We'll talk a lot more about all of these activities on November 7th, 8th, and 9th. And if you want to check some of them out on your own, we hope this is a really good resource for you and one that you can access independently.
Thank you, Jamie. So we'd like to thank you all for attending today, and we'd like to remind you to complete the evaluation, which is so important for us. It helps us to plan future webinars and events for you. So again, thank you for joining.
Debbie, before you get off, since we do have a couple of minutes, I see that there is another question.
Oh, we do? Oh, great. All right. So if you have to leave, we understand, but we're willing to hang around and answer your questions. So Fani, Tatiana, would you like to read?
Sure,
Yes,
I can.
Go ahead, Tatiana.
Okay, so Felicia is a parent. She's asking, what additional strategies can I use to get my 11-year-old who's currently reading below grade level on track?
So I think that's a great question. And of course, one of the challenges that come up with older children who are struggling readers is really giving them the component reading skills they need and also honoring their age and interests. And so I think that the graphic we had up earlier about listening comprehension and decoding is really useful when we're talking about late elementary school students or middle school students, because your daughter likely needs to build some decoding and fluency skills that she needs to do in simpler texts, but those aren't going to be the texts that are high interest for her, right? They're not about the drama and the fun that 11-year-old girls are having. And so I would really suggest that one thing to think about is how you can use peer and build listening comprehension around stories that are important and relevant to her. They might be things that you listen to as books on tape together or on podcasts or movies you see, and build her understanding of like background knowledge and predictions through stories like that. And then when you're thinking about building reading fluency in a text that is below grade level, being honest with her about the reason that you're working on something that might feel like pulling teeth is to boost her skills. And so my answer to this question is probably a much longer one, but I'd say that if you're practicing reading fluency, that's when you want to turn it into a game, give reinforcers, and be really transparent about the fact that that part's not fun. It's a necessary evil so she can read the cool stuff that she wants to. And then to build her listening comprehension on grade level texts that you might support through audiobooks or other mechanisms like that. Other folks might have other answers as well, but that's sort of my big broad thought for that idea.
Are there any?
Okay, go ahead. I have an 11-year-old that struggles with reading as well. And what I did is approach the teacher, and we discussed additional supports that she could be getting in schools. So one of the things that they provided was that she started working with a reading specialist, and they provided accommodations in the program in school where she was able to develop, and by the end of the school year she was reading when she wasn't at the beginning of the school year. So just having that conversation to add supports in for your child and see what's available in school that can support her, and also you're taking the time yourself at home also to support what is being done in school, so there is continuity between home and school.
I do think it's important to mention as well, so that no one misunderstands, that these supports or accommodations that they're talking about in school do not necessarily have to come through a special education program. So we don't want people to think that because you're a struggling learner that you cannot be accommodated with what you need just generally in the classroom.
And if possible, can we have time for one more question? Our audience is asking if they need to sign up for a boot camp, or do they need to show up? Debbie, did you want to expand on that?
Yes, you will need to sign up. Registration will be coming out. Registration will be available shortly. And there is a save the date that is included in the handouts. So the registration is not open yet, but the save the date is there. So if you have any questions between now and then, you can email me. And as soon as the registration is available, as soon as registration is open, I will be emailing all of the attendees.
Thank you for this clarification, Debbie. We have another question. I'm not sure if, let me just read it. Question is for Misan. The question that we're being asked in the 4th grade was, were very complicated with several parts, and my 9-year-old struggled with them. How can I help him? He has been using Newsrel for extra work. I'm not familiar with the program, Newsrel program. So what I understand the question is for her child in 4th grade, and the questions they ask in the classroom are complex and with multiple parts, and our child is struggling with comprehending those questions. How could she get help?
I think that's a tough question, and the answers that we gave previously maybe touch on it in a few different ways, because Fani had mentioned seeking out support from the school directly and seeing when there are support providers who can provide additional assistance. And Monique had added that a lot of that assistance can come through general education, informal supports as well. So I would bet that there are a lot of 4th graders in that classroom who struggle with multi-part questions. There are a lot of high school and college students who struggle with multi-part questions too. And part of the job of an instructor is really to explain to kids how to break that down. It sounds like in that classroom, it might have been helpful for Misan's son or other students to be able to say like, wow, okay, there's 4 parts to this question. I'm going to cover up lines 2 through 4 with my other sheet of paper for now so I can just concentrate on line 1. And again, it's ideal if a teacher is able to do that for everyone. But I think part of what's so useful about shared reading time at home is that we're giving our kids strategies. We're using the language between the two of us that we want them eventually to use on their own. So even when I'm saying like, oh, wow, that's a long question, that's probably something we've all said to our own kids when we're reading with them. Like, oh, I confused you. I talked for too long. Let me slow down here. I asked you 3 different things. And again, those response choices, being able to say, okay, here's the first thing. Let's forget about the other 2 for now. So I think a lot of what we're talking about today is slowing things down and taking it at your child's pace. That's obviously much harder to do in a classroom setting where there's so many kids with different needs working at different rates. But I think part of the answer is to communicate that challenge to a teacher, find out what they're already doing to support that in the classroom, and then to sneak in extra strategies for your child to say, when your teacher goes too fast for you, here are the 2 things you can do to get the help that you need. Monique, did you have something you wanted to add to that also?
Oh, no, I was agreeing. I'm sorry. I said,
Oh, okay, cool. I feel like we all have probably been in that situation and feel for the struggle that you might be having. Okay. But if we don't have other questions today or time for other questions today, this is what we want to do during that boot camp in November. So we're really excited to have more time with you all to talk about this further.
Exactly. Do we have any questions now?
See none right now. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions. Great discussion on the back and behind the scenes. We've been having a great discussion as well.
So thank you so much. And we hope that we'll see you all at one of the boot camps in November. And please share the save the date with other parents that you think might be interested. And like I said, don't forget to fill out the evaluation. Again, we want to, from our entire team, we want to thank you so much for your attention and your participation. And we'd like everyone to wish everyone a great day.